up to the oven door to check if any attention.
19 documentaries, 7 levels. From a shocking SeaWorld expose to a full-on cult, these are the most disturbing documentaries ever made. We'll start with some pretty weird movies, but they'll only get more disturbing the further we get. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. The Nightmare. Rodney Asher's 2015 feature, The Nightmare, is technically a documentary, yet it does play a hell of a lot more like a horror movie. The movie introduces 8 people who once thought they were alone and let them describe being awake, frozen, and certain that an unseen presence crept toward their bed. The whole time, the camera stayed low, half hidden behind door frames as if it shared their fear. Their interviews unfolded in rooms lit to look like carnival nightmares, drenched in strong, aggressive blues and reds that nodded to old surreal horror movies by Dario Argento. In between the interviews, the movie would cut to staged recreations of the experiences that these people lived through. That's where the horror influence really comes through. We see a looming silhouette with TV static skin towered over blankets, a phone demanding, "Let me in."
Let me in.
A claw crane punching through a torso. So much violent horror imagery, all while a creepy synth score throbs underneath to make it feel even more uncomfortable. It's literally like being inside some weird nightmare. Asher refused to include the safety net of neurologists or sleep experts, so there's no real effort to explain serotonin cycles or REM intrusion or even what happened here. All we have to go on are the dreamer's experiences, which is what makes this next part so strange. Their stories overlapped in weird ways, with every account mentioning the Shadow Men. Sometimes a group of 3, sometimes a single hat-wearing figure who watched them without speaking a word. If multiple strangers on different continents pictured the same entity, what the hell does that mean? Is it something more than just a dream? The documentary never tries to explain it because, honestly, it can't. But the use of the recreations makes the whole thing feel so much more immediate and disturbingly real. It bridges the gap between dream and reality until you don't really know if that impossible idea of one shadow man infiltrating multiple dreams is actually possible. By the time the movie showed at Sundance, everyone in the audience was in the same boat. We've all, at some point, half awakened in the dark and mistaken a coat for a figure. But after you see this movie, you start to wonder if that figure you saw was the Shadow Man. Level 2. The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, 2023 to 2025. Michael and Christine Barnett thought they were rescuing a 6-year-old Ukrainian orphan in 2010, but their lives quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. The Curious Case of Natalia Grace unfolds this, one of the most bizarre adoption cases in modern history. Natalia Grace arrived at her new home in Indiana, greeted by a loving family that wanted nothing more than to look after her. But something was odd with this 6-year-old. She had developed adult teeth, was menstruating, and displayed full-grown body hair over her body. The Barnetts claimed that Natalia was an adult woman, born with spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia congenita, a rare bone disorder that causes dwarfism and skeletal abnormalities. Her small stature and childlike appearance made her look much younger than she was. The documentary reveals the Barnetts' escalating allegations through home videos and recordings they made as evidence. They claim Natalia attempted to poison Christine's coffee with pledge cleaner, telling her adoptive mother, "I want to kill you." Michael described finding knives hidden under Natalia's bed and alleged she would stand at the foot of their bed while they slept, watching them with a blade in her hand. They accused her of trying to drag Christine toward an electric fence and placing thumbtacks face up on stairs so family members would step on them. Medical professionals began examining Natalia soon after that. 4 separate doctors confirmed she was indeed a child, yet the Barnetts dismissed these findings entirely. Dr. Andrew Riggs, an endocrinologist, estimated her age at somewhere between 9 and 11, older than she claimed, but still firmly within childhood. But the Barnetts refused to accept this assessment and sought legal action to resolve what they believed was an elaborate deception. In June 2012, the Marion County Superior Court granted the Barnetts' petition to legally change Natalia's birth year from 2003 to 1989, a re-aging process that transformed their 8-year-old daughter into a 22-year-old adult overnight. Armed with this legal documentation, the family moved Natalia into an apartment by Lafayette, Indiana, where she was forced to live alone. She survived on peanut butter sandwiches, ramen noodles, and occasional pizza, often unable to open canned food due to her physical limitations. Neighbors reported seeing her in dirty clothing with poor hygiene, hanging around a nearby an alcohol recovery house. While Natalia struggled to survive alone, the Barnetts relocated to Canada with their 3 biological sons, cutting all contact with her. After the success of the first, the network decided to do a follow-up series, Natalia Speaks. Giving her side of the story, Natalia disputes the Barnetts' claims, explaining that the coffee incident occurred while she was helping Christine clean and accidentally sprayed cleaner on a spot that needed attention. She denied ever holding knives or making threats, pointing to her physical limitations that made gripping utensils difficult. Natalia also revealed alleged physical and emotional treatment by Christine. DNA testing conducted during filming proved Natalia was indeed in her early 20s as of 2023, confirming she had been approximately 9 years old when abandoned by the Barnetts. Medical experts concluded the Barnetts had access to multiple professional assessments confirming Natalia's childhood status, yet chose to pursue re-aging despite this evidence. Prosecutors eventually charged both Barnetts with neglect of a dependent, though Michael was acquitted in 2022, and charges against Christine were later dropped. Re-aging is weird, but subscribing is definitely not. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can always see our newest icebergs. Level 3. Rewind 2019. Sasha Joseph Neulinger's father filmed everything. For years, that video camera captured birthday parties, hockey games, holidays, and a lot of evidence of something unspeakable happening in plain sight. Rewind's most disturbing aspect is under the surface the whole time. The home video footage reveals a bright, playful child who suddenly transforms into something else entirely. Sasha was a gifted kid who tested off the charts, then inexplicably withdrew from the world. But why? The home video shows family gatherings where Sasha's paternal relatives appear warm and jovial. Uncle Larry acts goofy with fake accents, Uncle Howard with his distinguished presence. But what Sasha's oblivious father did not know were that these men were operating within their family, normalizing their presence while committing unthinkable atrocities. Sasha was victimized by 3 family members, his uncles Howard and Lawrence Nevison, and Lawrence's son Stuart. The pattern of harm traced back generations. Henry himself had been harmed by his brothers as a child but never reported it, and Lawrence had been targeted by Howard. The camcorder footage documented this cycle of destruction being passed down. The bathroom scene represents one of the film's most harrowing revelations. Sasha's mother recalls the moment her young son, while taking a bath, told her, "There's swords in my private area." This cryptic statement was his way of communicating what was being done to him. He just had no vocabulary for what he was experiencing. Howard Nevison's presence in the footage becomes particularly menacing. As the cantor of Manhattan's prestigious Temple Emmanuel, he held a position of religious authority. Sasha was terrified of him more than his other attackers. Court documents revealed that Howard threatened to harm the child if he spoke out. The camcorder footage captures Sasha's behavioral deterioration in real time. As a previously outgoing child becomes tormented and withdrawn, he gains substantial weight, frowns constantly, erupts in dark emotions that he can't explain. The camera documents him becoming severely depressed and having thoughts of ending his life. The documentary structure mirrors the way memories work for those who've experienced childhood trauma. Sasha combed through 200 hours of footage not knowing what each unlabeled tape would contain. He'd watch beautiful moments he'd forgotten, then encounter an in-tape cut that suddenly showed one of his attackers. The legal proceedings that followed created their own form of torment. Sasha had to testify repeatedly, reliving his trauma for years as the cases dragged through the courts. Temple Emmanuel's response was to keep Howard Nevison in his position even after learning of the allegations, eventually establishing a legal defense fund for him. If it wasn't for Sasha's dad recording everything, nobody would have even known. Girl in the Picture, 2022. The Girl in the Picture opens with investigative journalist Matt Burbeck receiving a photo in 2002 of a father and daughter. But something in the girl's eyes suggested something off. That instinct launched an investigation that would eventually uncover one of the most disturbing cases of victimization in modern criminal history. The documentary revealed how Franklin Delano Floyd kidnapped 5-year-old Suzanne Savakis in 1975 when her mother was jailed for writing bad checks. Floyd simply vanished with all 4 children, dropping 3 at various locations, but keeping Suzanne for himself, renaming her Sharon Marshall, and raising her as his daughter while destroying every aspect of her identity and autonomy. Suzanne's high school friends are interviewed, remembering Shannon as brilliant and vivacious, earning a full scholarship to study aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech. But those same friends provided the documentary's most disturbing testimonies about Floyd's behavior toward his supposed daughter. They described how he photographed her obsessively, bought her lingerie, and exhibited an unhealthy fixation that made everyone uncomfortable. The film uses archival footage and photographs to show how Floyd prevented Suzanne from attending college despite her academic achievements, instead forcing her into exotic dancing to support them both. When Suzanne became pregnant, Floyd saw opportunity rather than obstacle, eventually forcing her to marry him under yet another false identity. FBI agents involved in the case discuss how Floyd had been a federal fugitive since 1973, with a criminal history stretching back to 1962 when he first kidnapped a 4-year-old from a Georgia bowling alley. His decades-long crime spree involved multiple identities, bank robberies, and attempted kidnappings before he encountered Suzanne's vulnerable family and saw an opportunity for yet more evil. Eventually, investigators discovered photographs hidden in Floyd's truck showing a bound and beaten woman, later identified as Cheryl Cameso, a friend of Suzanne's that Floyd felt he had to eliminate. This was a pattern for him, eliminating anyone who might help Suzanne escape his control, including this friend who had tried to assist her. When Suzanne died in what appeared to be a hit-and-run accident in 1990, investigators' suspicions were confirmed through forensic evidence, suggesting she had been beaten before her death. There was only one suspect. But Floyd did not stop with Suzanne's death. He kidnapped Suzanne's son Michael from elementary school, taking the boy and the school principal at gunpoint. While the principal was found handcuffed to a tree, Michael disappeared forever, never to be found. Floyd confessed to shooting the 6-year-old twice in the back of the head on the same day he took him. The documentary's impact on viewers was immediate and visceral. Social media responses described it as absolutely one of the most horrific, sickening, frightening things people had watched. The depraved level of evil is something nobody could comprehend. Wild Wild Country, 2018. The 2018 Netflix docuseries Wild Wild Country chronicles the Ranjishpuram commune in Oregon during the early 1980s, where followers of Indian guru Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh built what they believed would be a perfect society on 64,000 acres of desert land. It was supposed to be a utopia. It was not that. Ma Anand Sheela emerged as the guru's ruthless enforcer, implementing a surveillance system that would make even fascist totalitarian regimes envious. The commune operated extensive wiretapping operations unprecedented in Oregon history, monitoring phone calls and bugging hotel rooms, restaurant tables, and private quarters throughout their territory. Federal investigators discovered over 150 security officers maintaining constant surveillance of anyone entering their domain, with observation posts recording license plates and assigning threat codes to visitors. But that was just phase 1. It didn't take long before this paranoid control escalated into America's very first bioterror attack. To influence the local elections and protect their place in the world, Sheila and her accomplice Ma Anand Puja purchased Salmonella enterica typhimurium from medical suppliers and carefully contaminated salad bars at 10 restaurants in the Dallas, Oregon. They concealed the bacteria in plastic bags containing light brown liquid they nicknamed salsa, spreading it across food and pouring it into salad dressings. The attack infected 751 people with acute gastroenteritis, sending 45 to hospitals, making it the largest bioterrorist incident in U.S. history. Investigators initially attributed the outbreak to poor hygiene until Congressman James Weaver suspected deliberate contamination and pushed for deeper investigation. When authorities finally gained access to Ranjishpuram, they discovered laboratory equipment for large-scale bacteria production, copies of the anarchist cookbook, and literature on explosives and biological warfare. In their efforts at control, they had brought the attention right to their door. The investigation also uncovered plans to eliminate federal prosecutor Charles Turner and evidence of previous attacks on county officials through poisoned water glasses. That was never made a reality, but they were clearly prepared. The documentary showed how Rajneesh himself eventually turned against Sheila, calling her and her associates a gang of fascists and inviting authorities to investigate their crimes. Sheila received concurrent 4.5-year sentences for immigration fraud, wiretapping, and conspiracy, serving 29 months before deportation. The commune collapsed completely, with Rajneesh fleeing to India and their collection of 93 Rolls Royces sold at auction. Making a 2015. Netflix released Making a in December 2015 and instantly became a massive hit, with people stunned by this man's extraordinary legal ordeal. Stephen Avery was a Wisconsin man who spent 18 years imprisoned for a violent crime against Penny Bjornson that he never committed. DNA evidence had finally freed him in 2003, proving that Gregory Allen had committed the attack while Avery sat behind bars. For years, he had lost his life because of something he had absolutely nothing to do with. The Innocence Project had worked to clear Avery's name, and his exoneration should have marked the end of his nightmare. Instead, it became the beginning of something far more sinister. Avery filed a $36 million lawsuit against Manitowoc County for the wrongful conviction, seeking justice for nearly 2 decades of stolen life. The depositions revealed what his civil lawyer called a conspiracy of silence among law enforcement officials. Then, Teresa Halbach disappeared on Halloween 2005. Teresa Halbach was a 25-year-old photographer who had visited Avery's auto salvage yard for an Auto Trader magazine assignment and never returned home. Within days, Avery found himself arrested for her killing, even after his massive lawsuit against the county remained pending. The timing struck many as suspicious. The very officials he was suing for framing him in a crime he did not commit were now investigating him for this new crime. It didn't seem to add up. The documentary revealed how investigators brought in Avery's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Daisy, for questioning. Daisy had well-documented intellectual limitations, with an IQ between 70 and 81. The interrogation footage showed detectives using aggressive tactics on the teenager, who was questioned without a parent or attorney present. They promised him everything would be okay if he told them what they wanted to hear, then fed him details about the crime. Soon enough, evidence began appearing throughout the Avery property in ways that defense attorneys found deeply troubling. Halbach's vehicle was discovered covered with branches, while her key, containing only Avery's DNA despite her regular use of it, turned up in his bedroom after multiple searches had failed to locate it. His blood appeared inside her car, leading his defense team to suggest it came from a vial collected during his previous case. The documentary's creators, Laura Ricciardi and Moira Demos, spent 10 years filming the case, convinced that there was something wrong with the case. What came from it was a disturbing portrait of a justice system that seemed determined to convict Avery regardless of the evidence. Federal courts later found that Dacey's confession had been coerced, though appeals continue to this day. The series sparked international outrage and prompted petitions demanding the Stevens release, but above all else, it reminded people just how broken the U.S. justice system really is. Blackfish, 2013. In 2013, director Gabriella Copperthwaite released Blackfish, a documentary that nobody could have predicted would be one of the most disturbing movies of the year. The film dissects the life of Tilikum, a 12,000-pound orca who became synonymous with the darker side of marine entertainment after being involved in the deaths of 3 people. The film opens with a chilling 911 call where a marine park employee reported that a whale has eaten one of the trainers, immediately establishing that this was not going to be some cutesy tribute to SeaWorld. Not even a little bit. The documentary exposes how Tilikum's violent behavior stems from decades of confinement and psychological distress. Captured at age 2 off the coast of Iceland in 1983, he was torn from his mother and placed in increasingly hostile environments. At Sealand of the Pacific in Canada, Tilikum endured 14 hours daily, locked in a dark 8-meter-wide enclosure with 2 larger female orcas who repeatedly attacked him. That bullying was relentless. These females, dominant in orca society, treated the young male as an intruder in their artificial family structure and punished him accordingly. Much like human serial killers, Tilikum was so mistreated that he had a deep-rooted urge to lash out at the world. The film revealed the horrific details of Tilikum's first human fatality in 1991. Trainer Kelty Byrne fell into the pool at Sealand, and the 3 orcas, with Tilikum as the apparent instigator, stripped off her clothes, mauled her, and ended her life. Rather than addressing the incident, Sealand simply closed and sold Tilikum to SeaWorld, where trainers weren't informed about his deadly history. The second death occurred in 1999 when Daniel Dukes was found draped over Tilikum's back after sneaking into SeaWorld. The autopsy revealed gruesome details that SeaWorld attempted to downplay. Tilikum had stripped the man, bit off his genitals, and left bite marks covering his body. Yet, Tilikum continued performing and breeding at the park. Dawn Branshaw's death in 2010 represented the culmination of decades of institutional negligence. She was one of SeaWorld's most experienced trainers, but she was grabbed by her ponytail during a routine interaction and dragged underwater, thrashing her around the pool while staff frantically tried to distract Tilikum with nets and food. Her hair and scalp had to be retrieved separately from the pool bottom. The documentary exposed the physical deterioration these magnificent creatures endured in captivity for our entertainment. All male orcas at SeaWorld had collapsed dorsal fins, a condition that occurs in less than 1% of wild orcas, but affects 100% of captive males. The whales exhibited stereotypic behaviors not seen in nature, swimming endlessly in circles, lying motionless at the surface for hours, and gnawing on concrete tank walls until their teeth broke and bled. The documentary stunned the world and shamed SeaWorld enough that they had to make drastic changes to the way they operated as a business. But those who have seen the documentary will know there's no going back to SeaWorld no matter what they do. Level 4. The Push. On the Cliff. The Channel 4 documentary The Push presented viewers with unprecedented access to a Scottish High Court trial following the case against Kashif Anwar, who killed his pregnant wife, Fawzia Javed, by pushing her from Arthur's Seat in September 2021. The 2-part series captured the proceedings minute by minute as prosecutors built their case against a man who claimed his wife simply fell from the Edinburgh landmark. Over the course of the documentary, we start to unravel the calculated nature of domestic violence through Fawzia's own evidence. As a lawyer, she had a feeling that she would need all the evidence she could, just in case something happened. so she had secretly recorded conversations with her husband, documenting his threats and controlling behavior. In one recording played during the trial, Anwar told his wife, "Don't challenge me, do not be that British woman." Another recording captured him saying, "You end this and I will ruin yours," after Fauzia told him he had ruined her life. The documentary showed how Fauzia had contacted police twice to create a record of her husband's violent behavior, though she didn't want them to intervene at that point. Her mother Yasmin had established a code phrase, "I feel like cream cakes," that Fauzia could text if she felt in imminent danger. Part of what makes this so uncomfortable to watch is the understanding that she knew she was in mortal peril and was building a legal case against her tormentor, waiting for the right moment. That moment only came after her death. The documentary captured her final moments through witness testimony. After falling 50 feet from the rocky outcrop, she survived long enough to tell Dania Rafik, a passerby who reached her first, "Don't let my husband near me. He pushed me." When police officer Rhiannon Clutton arrived, Fauzia explained that her husband pushed her because she had told him she wanted to end their marriage. The documentary revealed that even after Anwar's conviction, his family continued to withhold Fauzia's personal belongings from her grieving relatives. They were convinced he was innocent, framed by a vindictive wife. The documentary shows just how brilliant Fauzia truly was, essentially prosecuting her own case from beyond the grave, with her collected evidence forming the pillar of the prosecution case. Anwar thought he had brought an end to his problems. Instead, he underestimated a brilliant woman who was already orchestrating his downfall. The Devil Next Door, 2019. Netflix's 2019 docuseries The Devil Next Door unraveled a story that felt unbelievable even in an era of true crime TV. The film zeroed in on John Demjanjuk, a retired Cleveland auto worker who had lived decades as a friendly Ukrainian-American grandfather, yet was suddenly dragged into an Israeli courtroom in 1986 accused of being Ivan the Terrible, the sadistic gas chamber operator from Treblinka. Archival footage showed survivors pointing straight at him and describing how he had used iron pipes, whips, and more to torment them, haunting their dreams for 40 years. Viewers watched him get convicted and sentenced to hang, only for secret Soviet files to surface after the Berlin Wall fell, naming another guard, Ivan Marchenko, as the real Ivan. The Israeli Supreme Court overturned the verdict in 1993, and Demjanjuk flew back to Ohio, free yet reviled. The series then followed investigators from the U.S. Justice Department and later German prosecutors as they rebuilt the case, this time ignoring the Treblinka question and focusing on his proven service with the SS-run Trauniki unit at Sobibor, Majdanek, and Flossenburg. A fragile black and white ID card stamped with Nazi insignia, produced frame by frame on screen, placed him at Sobibor during the spring and summer of 1943, the exact months when 28,060 people were sent to the gas chambers there. German judges in Munich accepted the logic that a guard at an extermination camp was by definition part of the killing process and handed the 91-year-old a 5-year sentence in 2011. The documentary lingered on the image of Demjanjuk sitting silent behind dark glasses, released on appeal because of age, while aging survivors outside the courthouse asked how any ordinary neighbor could carry that past and still mow his lawn without feeling any guilt about it. Every episode pushed the same queasy question. Was the man on screen a monstrous individual or a replaceable cog? And did either answer make the historical reality any less horrifying? He died in 2012 before his appeal concluded, so German law erased the judgment entirely, meaning there wasn't any comfortable ending for us. Jonestown, The Life and Death of People's Temple, 2006. Stanley Nelson's 2006 documentary Jonestown, The Life and Death of People's Temple revealed footage that had never been seen before. An intimate look at Jim Jones transforming from a charismatic preacher into something far darker. The film traced how Jones funded his People's Temple in 1955 Indiana as a racially integrated church which seemed revolutionary and progressive for its time. Nelson interviewed over 30 survivors and family members who entrusted him with precious recordings that helped piece together exactly why people believed in Jones until the very end. The documentary showed Jones moving his congregation from Indiana to California's Redwood Valley in the late 1960s, then expanding to San Francisco by the early 1970s. Home videos captured the construction of the Jonestown compound in Guyana, along with video diaries of cult members documenting their daily lives. These intimate recordings made clear how Jones gradually isolated his followers from the outside world, creating what he called a socialist paradise in the jungle. It was a utopia where reality was not welcomed. The film goes on to show how Jones conducted rehearsals for what he termed revolutionary acts of self-destruction, using unpoisoned drinks during practice sessions called White Nights. Former members described how Jones would force congregants to line up and drink from a vat, testing their loyalty through these terrifying drills, which obviously led to the inevitable. The documentary included audio recordings from the actual pavilion on November 18, 1978, when Jones ordered his followers to drink cyanide-laced Flavor Aid. The documentary goes much deeper than the story we know, however. Nelson's camera captured the progression of Jones' mental deterioration after moving to California in 1965, how he banned intimate relationships between temple members while engaging in numerous affairs himself. Survivors described how Jones would force people to confess imagined sins in front of the congregation, creating an atmosphere of constant fear and paranoia. He was no longer that revolutionary progressive leader, he was a tyrant. 918 people died that day in November 1978, including 276 children who were given the poison first through syringes. Investigators found that many adults were also injected against their will, while armed guards prevented anyone from fleeing the compound. This was not the peaceful transition Jones had promised his followers, but a horrific ending to what had begun as a message of racial equality and social justice. The documentary is the most intimate look at the Jim Jones story that has ever been, using actual eyewitness footage from the incident to show how ordinary people found themselves trapped in an extraordinary tragedy. Untold: The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, 2022. Netflix's 2022 documentary, Untold: The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, digs into one of college football's most twisted deceptions through the lens of Manti Te'o, the man who became its victim. The two-part film peeled back layers of catfishing scheme that destroyed a young athlete's trust and nearly ended his career before it began. Te'o sat before cameras nearly a decade later, recounting how Renaya Tuisasopo had manufactured an entire human being named Lene Kekua, complete with family members, tragic backstory, and untimely death. The documentary revealed the methodical nature of Tuisasopo's manipulation, showing how she had used photographs of Diana Mira, a high school classmate, to construct Lene's visual identity. During her interview, Tuisasopo openly admits that she had done this before to other victims, suggesting a pattern of predatory behavior that extended far beyond Te'o. We have no idea how many victims she had, but she had even convinced Diane to pose for a specific photo under false pretenses, claiming it was for a cousin who had been in a car accident. Throughout her interview, Tuisasopo shows no genuine remorse, with viewers noting how she seemed almost gleeful when recounting her elaborate lies. But the level and scope of them were so much darker than she seemed to recall. The film highlights how Tuisasopo had manipulated Te'o's grief over his grandmother's actual death, timing Lene's fictional demise to occur the same day, amplifying his emotional vulnerabilities. It's the kind of thing that could have pushed him over the edge. Te'o's mother described watching her son withdraw completely after the scandal broke, his personality fundamentally altered by the betrayal. The linebacker had fallen from potential first-round NFL draft pick to a figure of national ridicule, and he didn't even know it was fake until he received a phone call in December 2012 from someone claiming to be the supposedly dead Lene, saying she was alive. As a defense, Tuisasopo explained that childhood trauma had driven her to create alternate personas, but given the extreme nature of her lies and the impact that it had on Teo's life, it's hard for anybody to feel any degree of sympathy for her. The documentary captured how she had maintained multiple fake voices during phone conversations with Teo, demonstrating a level of commitment to the deception that lasted years. She took advantage of his loneliness for her own purposes and almost drove him to do the unthinkable. Just Melvin, Just Evil, 2000. James Ronald Whitney returned to his hometown with a camera and something that he had to confess. Using his home movies, hospital footage, and family interviews, he began constructing a documentary that would confront the legacy of Mel Just, a man whose actions had haunted his family for generations. That movie would become Just Melvin, Just Evil. James gathered his family members, allowing them to speak about the shame that had lingered in their family for decades. His grandmother, frail and wheelchair-bound, offered a half-smile as she repeated that she'd never known what was happening until it was too late. Whether that was true or not is unclear, but then James decided to get the biggest interview of the entire movie, Melvin himself. Naturally, Melvin was not the most welcoming interview of them all. He refused every claim, denying that he had violated any child in his care. Unfortunately, nobody else agreed. James's aunts recounted wild nights in cheap motels, cheap pills swallowed to erase the day. They listed the years they drifted, with one cousin hustling on street corners, another drinking from sunrise to blackout. Their whole lives had become chaos, driven by drugs and alcohol to try and numb the pain of what they had been through because of this man. Yet, when James asked Melvin whether he felt any remorse, the old man snapped, ordering his grandson to shut the camera off before he showed just how nasty he could be. It was confirmation without confirmation that Melvin was a monster. When the half-sister mentioned the nurse found in his bedroom, James cut to a photograph of a gravestone and says nothing, allowing the audience to make the connection. The county nurse who walked in on him during one of his crimes mysteriously died soon after. James later explains that he felt he had to make this movie, being the only one to escape unscathed. He felt extremely guilty having to listen to stories of two sisters describing how they woke to discover they were no longer safe inside their own home, how they learned to dodge his visits. Nobody did anything to stop Melvin committing these acts, but at least the documentary is there to expose him as the monster he's always been. Level 5. Murdaugh, A Southern Scandal, 2023. Netflix released Murdaugh Families: A Southern Scandal in February 2023, documenting the dramatic collapse of one of America's greatest legal dynasties. Locals call South Carolina's 14th Judicial District Murdaugh County because 3 generations of the family consecutively served as circuit solicitors from 1920 to 2006. They basically owned the region. This unprecedented legal control created an environment where the family operated with total impunity, intimidating anyone who crossed them. Community members interviewed for the series expressed relief when Alex Murdaugh was finally arrested, describing years of fear about challenging the family's authority. But why was he arrested, you might be asking? The series documented a trail of suspicious deaths connected to the Murdaughs, beginning with 19-year-old Mallory Beach's fatal boat crash in February 2019. Paul Murdaugh, Alex's son, was driving the boat while intoxicated when it struck a bridge, killing Beach and injuring several others. You might be thinking, that's an accident. Well, yes. But survivors testified that Paul's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit, yet the family's influence initially protected him from immediate consequences. He should have gone to prison, but he didn't, because his family owned the police. But this was not the only crime going on. Alex Murdaugh embezzled over $8.5 million from clients and his law firm across 10 years, exploiting trust that had been built over generations. The series showed how he specifically targeted vulnerable clients, including stealing $4.3 million from the family of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaughs' longtime housekeeper who died in a suspicious fall at their home. That one might not have been an accident. In fact, the documentary's most shocking revelation came through its examination of her death, where Alex later admitted he fabricated the story about dogs calling her fall to fraudulently obtain insurance payouts. Court documents revealed he invented the critical facts surrounding her death, all for the sake of financial gain. The series culminated with the shocking homicides of Alex's wife Maggie and son Paul in June 2021, which prosecutors argued were committed to generate sympathy and distract from his mounting financial crimes, which is an insane strategy. And even when it went to trial, he maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, including his own admission to lying about his whereabouts on the night of the killing. The whole documentary is just a reminder that law and rules are for the poor, not the rich. Level 6. Shoah, 1985. Claude Lanzmann's 1985 documentary Shoah is one of the longest and most harrowing documentaries you'll ever see. A 9.5-hour exploration built entirely on testimonies from Holocaust survivors, perpetrators, and witnesses, with no archival footage whatsoever. Lanzmann spent 12 years tracking down people across the globe, conducting interviews that would form the backbone of what critics called a sheer masterpiece and the greatest documentary about contemporary history ever made. His approach was deliberately radical, rejecting the conventional documentary format that relied on historical images to illustrate events. He wanted you to hear about the horrors cameras did not capture. The interviews themselves were exercises in psychological excavation. Lanzmann would push his subjects to recall the most minute details, believing that through these specifics, the full horror would emerge. Abraham Bomba, a barber who cut women's hair before they entered the gas chambers at Treblinka, provided one of the film's most harrowing moments, describing how he encountered the wife and sister of a fellow barber in the gas chamber, then broke down completely. Lanzmann refused to stop filming, insisting they continue despite Bomba's visible distress. After nearly 4 minutes of silence, Bomba resumed speaking, explaining how his colleague managed only to spend a few extra seconds with his loved ones before they died. The documentary structure shifts between 3 primary locations: the Chełmno extermination camp, where mobile gas vans were first used, the death camps of Treblinka and Auschwitz-Birkenau, and the Warsaw Ghetto. Franz Suchamel, an SS officer at Treblinka, was filmed secretly as he described the processions to the gas chambers and the construction of additional killing facilities. Heinrich Gakowski, who drove trains carrying prisoners to Treblinka, spoke about consuming vodka supplied by the Nazis to help him cope with his role. Throughout all of this, Lanzmann filmed his subjects at the actual locations where the events occurred, where millions had died. The absence of historical footage and devastating recollection meant audiences had to rely entirely on human testimony, making the experience more immediate and psychologically demanding than traditional documentaries about the Holocaust. The Staircase, 2004. The French documentary team arrived in Durham almost immediately after novelist Michael Peterson found his wife Kathleen lying at the foot of their back hall stairs in December 2001. They started filming before the blood on the steps dried, capturing detectives, lawyers, and family members as they tried to decide whether Kathleen's catastrophic head wounds came from a freak fall or a deliberate attack. Over 8 initial episodes, later expanded to 13, The Staircase immersed viewers in the details of a homicide investigation that was never resolved, even after 2 decades. Director Jean-Xavier Delestrade secured extraordinary permission to film everywhere, inside strategy sessions with defense attorney David Rudolph, inside Peterson's holding cell, even inside the courtroom during jury selection. There's no voiceover in the documentary, meaning that we are truly just taking in what we see and hear without being told anything these people do not know. But then we hear the 911 call, and it starts to shift the vibe of the story. Peterson's voice sounded strangely calm as he reported a fall and so much blood. Autopsy photos later revealed 7 deep lacerations across the back of Kathleen's scalp, no skull fracture, and a fractured neck bone, injuries the state said matched repeated blows, not a simple fall. Someone had beaten her. The supposed weapon, a hollow brass fireplace blowpoke, surfaced months into the trial, hanging dusty in a downstairs closet. Jurors watched replay after replay of lawyers brandishing the item, recreating what could have happened with it. But while they were trying to figure out the most logical answer, some had their own ideas. Outside the courtroom, neighbor and lawyer Larry Pollard floated the now famous owl theory, arguing that an aggressive barred owl sliced Kathleen's scalp with its talons, causing her to bleed and collapse. Now, I know that sounds absolutely absurd, but microscopic feathers and fresh pine needles found in her hair gave the idea just enough plausibility, even though anybody with half a brain dismissed it outright. The staircase is just as disturbing today as it was then because the total lack of answers. Every apparent answer from the bloody biology to the motive or the weapon came undone in later episodes. Viewers watched Peterson step out of prison after a judge declared the original trial unfair, only to see him later accept a manslaughter plea rather than risk a retrial, all while insisting he did nothing wrong. We're given so much, and yet there's not enough to make a conclusive answer. 20 years on, we are none the wiser to what actually happened that night. Paradise Lost, The Child at Robin Hood Hills, 1996. Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky landed in West Memphis, Arkansas in June 1993, with cameras in hand, expecting to document a straightforward story about teen killers. 3 8-year-old boys had been discovered dead in a drainage ditch, and the filmmakers thought they were about to capture how troubled youth could commit such horrific acts. The document they would create, Paradise Lost, The Child at Robin Hood Hills, turned into something far more complex and unsettling than anyone anticipated. The case began when Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch went missing on May 5th, 1993. By the next afternoon, their bodies were found in Robin Hood Hills, naked, bound with their own shoelaces, and showing signs of brutal violence. But the crime scene itself was strangely clean, almost swept, with no blood evidence despite the extent of the injuries. Within a month, police had arrested 3 teenagers, 18-year-old Damian Eccles, 17-year-old Jason Baldwin, and 17-year-old Jesse Miskelly Jr. The community, gripped by satanic panic, readily accepted that these outsiders had committed ritualistic killings. They wore black, listened to metal music, and didn't fit the conservative Christian mold. They must be evil. But Berlinger and Sinofsky secured extraordinary access to the case. They shot over 150 hours of footage across 10 months and 79 filming days, convincing everyone involved to open their doors. At one point, they were even granted access to discussions in the judges' chambers. The level of access was almost unthinkable by today's standards. The community simply allowed these filmmakers to document everything as it unfolded, which was shocking. Police questioned Jesse Miskelly for 12 hours without counsel present. Given his intellectual condition, this was a problem. Only 46 minutes of this session was recorded, and the confession was riddled with factual errors about timing, methods, and details of the killings. Experts later classified it as a textbook false confession, obtained through psychological pressure and leading questions. The documentary shows how investigators fed Miskelly information during breaks in recording, then resumed taping when he parroted back their details. They told him about a $50,000 reward, showed him pictures of the victims, and used psychological manipulation, including playing a child's voice saying only the perpetrators knew what happened. Even when Miskelly immediately recanted his confession, it became the primary evidence against all 3 teenagers. The filmmakers captured the trials as the prosecution built their case on satanic ritual theories, despite having no physical evidence linking the teenagers to the crime scene. By the time Berlinger and Sinofsky finished editing their 150 hours of footage into a 2.5-hour documentary, they captured something unprecedented. A real-time documentary of how a community's demand for justice could override the actual pursuit of truth. The film aired on HBO in June 1996, launching a movement that would ultimately help free the West Memphis Three after 18 years in prison. Level 7. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father, 2008. Kurt Cobain picked up his camera in 2001 with the simple intention of creating a video scrapbook for a child who would never meet his father. Andrew Bagby, Cobain's childhood friend and frequent collaborator in amateur films, had been shot and killed by his ex-girlfriend Shirley Jane Turner after he ended their relationship. She had fled to Canada, but not before dropping a bombshell that would reshape everything. She was pregnant with Andrew's son. What began as a touching tribute quickly morphed into something far more sinister. Cobain gathered home videos, interviews with friends and family, and personal stories to paint a picture of Andrew for little Zachary Turner. At first, the footage feels warm and intimate, filled with people sharing fond memories and silly anecdotes about a beloved friend and son. Cobain himself narrates directly to Zachary, creating what truly feels like a father's love letter delivered through dozens of voices. But then, the Canadian legal system enters the frame, and everything changes. Despite facing charges for premeditated killing, Turner was released on bail. The courts not only allowed her freedom, but granted her custody of baby Zachary despite her well-known killing of his father. Andrew's parents, Kate and David Bagby, packed up their lives and moved to Newfoundland to fight for access to their grandson while navigating the bureaucratic nightmare of extradition proceedings. The documentary's tone shifts dramatically as months stretch into years with Turner free and raising Zachary. Cobain's camera captured the Bagbys' mounting frustration as they were forced to maintain cordial relationships with their son's alleged killer just to spend time with their grandchild. The system prioritized Turner's parental rights over public safety concerns despite overwhelming evidence against her. Then, on August 18, 2003, the story took a devastating turn. Turner drugged 13-month-old Zachary and jumped into the Atlantic Ocean at Conception Bay South, ending both their lives. The revelation hit viewers like a freight train because Cobain structures the film to mirror his own real-time discovery of these events. What starts as a memorial project becomes a devastating indictment of institutional failure. Canada failed Zachary. The way the film documents this transformation in real time is exactly why it's so powerful. Cobain's original footage remains, but it's now framed by the knowledge that every system designed to protect children failed spectacularly. A 2006 inquiry concluded that Zachary's death was entirely preventable, noting that judges, prosecutors, and child welfare agencies were more concerned with presuming Turner's innocence than protecting a vulnerable child. Canadian MP Scott Andrews introduced Zachary's bill after viewing the documentary, strengthening bail conditions in cases involving child welfare. But for Cobain, the Bagbys, and viewers, no amount of legal reform could undo the horror of what happened. There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane, 2011. The 2011 HBO film There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane examines the July 2009 Taconic State Parkway crash in granular detail, threading together surveillance clips, 911 recordings, cell phone logs, autopsy data, and intense family interviews to pull viewers through a minute-by-minute reconstruction of this horrific incident. The movie opens with silent gas station security footage showing Diane Schuler stepping from a red Ford Windstar, searching store shelves, leaving empty-handed, and driving away. That plain slice of video set an unsettling tone because nothing on the screen seems even slightly off, but it was. At the kitchen table, Daniel Schuler recounted waking to headlines that labeled his wife a drunk driver. Sister-in-law Jay scrolled through frame-by-frame replays of the gas station clip, convinced a micro-gesture or blink would unlock what happened. Neither of them believed that she was drunk, but the lab numbers claimed there were traces of undigested alcohol in the stomach and recent use. That didn't seem right. Something was wrong with her. A forensic pathologist spelled out how liquid vodka remaining in the stomach proved consumption during the drive, not hours earlier. But a psychiatrist was busy mapping possible effects of lifelong perfectionism and unresolved childhood abandonment, believing that this was an old-fashioned psychological break. Whatever happened, the crash was devastating. At 12:58 p.m., her niece Emma made a call with some panicked words. "There's something wrong with Aunt Diane." By this point, the van was weaving across lanes. At 1:35 p.m., Diane caused a head-on impact after 1.7 miles driving south in the northbound lane at roughly 80 miles per hour. Witnesses described her face fixed ahead, hands locked at 10 and 2. The children in the car were not moving. Everybody died. Nobody knew what happened. The film stacked every lab result, witness account, and behavioral clue on the table, yet refused to issue a verdict, just like the investigators who conceded they might never know why a woman described as a supermom self-destructed with 5 children aboard. The footage of her at the gas station is all we have left to go on. The Confession Killer, 2019. The 2019 Netflix documentary series The Confession Killer explored one of the most unsettling cases in American criminal history, where a drifter named Henry Lee Lucas convinced law enforcement he was the country's most prolific killer. Lucas confessed to over 600 homicides across the United States, providing detailed sketches of victims and gruesome descriptions of their deaths that left investigators amazed at his apparent photographic memory. In fact, they were so impressed that these police departments eagerly embraced these confessions, using them to close 197 cold cases and provide grieving families with long-awaited answers. The documentary revealed the shocking extent to which authorities pampered Lucas during his confession spree. Texas Rangers provided him with steak dinners, strawberry milkshakes, cigarettes, and television access in exchange for his stories, allowing him to roam the jail without handcuffs, treated more like a consultant than a dangerous criminal. But most disturbingly, investigators showed Lucas crime scene photographs and case files, allowing him to refresh his memory with details only the actual perpetrator should know. This practice essentially coached him on how to fabricate convincing confessions. The series showed just how well Lucas manipulated the system. Despite having an IQ of only 87, he demonstrated remarkable cunning in gathering information about unsolved cases. His confessions, covering victims of all demographics across multiple states, involving methods ranging from vehicular homicide to stabbing with a ballpoint pen. He claimed responsibility for everything from to with his alleged victim count ballooning from 100 to 350 to eventually 600 people. It seemed simply impossible, because it was. DNA testing later proved Lucas had fabricated the vast majority of his confessions. While he likely killed only 3 people, his mother, girlfriend, and elderly landlord, law enforcement had used his false admissions to close hundreds of cases. This meant the real killers remained free, while families who thought they had found closure discovered their loved ones' cases were built on lies. Lucas later recanted his confessions, admitting he had manipulated police to receive better treatment in jail, but the series painted a horrific picture of systemic failures where confirmation bias and the pressure to solve cold cases led to one of the largest criminal justice hoaxes in American history. If you want more disturbing icebergs, why not check out this video about the most disturbing things on the internet?